Hello, welcome to Denton's Tales of the Viking Age. In this video, I'm taking a look at one of the symbols associated with the Vikings. Not helmets with horns, which they never actually wore. Helmets like that. Nor fearsome dragon-headed ships, which they did use rather frequently, as it happens. No, I'm looking at a very small piece of cloth, a triangular shaped piece of cloth, decorated with hanging tassels around the edge and having a raven with outstretched wings as its emblem. The triangular shape, incidentally, is very reminiscent of the metal weather vanes carried on Viking ships, often very elaborately decorated and mounted on a pole, which I'll have more to say about later. Now, the cloth that I'm talking about has become known as the Viking Raven Banner. And here is an example of it. Here we have it there. It is straight along the top, and where it was attached to the pole upright at the side. And the pole would have had a projecting bar that secured the top of the banner, rather like an upside-down uppercase letter L. This reproduction, incidentally, was made by the excellent Swedish GRIMFROST company, who have kindly allowed me to use their images in my videos. Their website is well worth a look. Excellent reproductions of Norse items. So, this has become known as the famous Viking Raven Banner. The Viking Raven Banner. Now, there's somewhat of an inaccuracy to begin with. The Viking Raven Banner. In other words, the flag carried by the Vikings. Not that it couldn't have been. Well, it could have been, but it wasn't. No. In fact, there was no Viking banner. But didn't I just say that this is the Viking banner? No, I said it has become known as such. And there's a bit of a difference between being known as and actually being. There wasn't a Viking banner because the Vikings were not one unified group. They weren't led by one king. They were an assortment of various tribal groups, each led by its own king or jarl, local petty chieftains, and so on, not paying much more than lip service to any national king, even if there was one. Nor did they even all come from one country. They came initially from Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, and later resided in Britain, Ireland, Francia, and just about everywhere else in Europe, and many lands beyond, and often fighting each other in disputes over land or trading rights, something that's often overlooked. They were very often not bosom buddies by a long way, as here in Ireland, for example, where there was a great rivalry between the Norse kingdoms of Dyflin, or Dublin as it is now, and Limerick, which led to King Olaf of Dyflin going down and capturing the King of Limerick and smashing up all his boats in 937 AD. And there was a battle in Dundalk Bay on one occasion between rival groups of Danes and Norwegians. We must also remember the conflicts of the infamous Bloodfield, where someone might be killed, and their relatives were then honor bound to avenge the death by killing a member of the family responsible for the death. That family then having to avenge their death in return, forcing the first family to then avenge that new death, and so on and so on. It just went on forever. So there was rather more fighting going on between the Vikings themselves than there ever was any great feeling of national unity among them, since they did not see themselves primarily as nationalities as such, as a rule. They were this Jarldom or that kingdom, which just happened to be in Norway or Denmark or Sweden, or perhaps not even in Scandinavia at all, but overseas in Ireland, Shetland and Orkney, the Isle of Man, or the Faroe Islands. Yes, they regarded themselves as Norwegians, Danes, or Swedes in the abstract, you might say. But their sense of national unity, well, that came second to their own local interest. They could come together and fight nationally, if you like, such as when Norway's King Harald invaded Denmark, or when the Danes had to resist the attacks of King Henry the Fowler. And the later Scandinavian rulers did establish strong national kingdoms, men like Gorum the Old and Harald Bluetooth, suppressing a lot of the combative power of local jarls and forcing them to pay more heed to a central power. Not that they always did. But for much of the Viking Age, they were far more preoccupied with intertribal disputes than national ones. They weren't really interested in the national aspect as long as their little piece of it was okay. Of course, the same applied in other lands as well. If, for example, the ancient Britons had seen themselves as just being Britons, rather than various warring tribes, each with their own little local agenda, the Brigantes, the Iceni, the Cassi, the Calvetti, etc., they might have fought off the Roman invasion. And when the Iceni eventually rose up against Rome under the great Queen Boadicea, she had great difficulty persuading any of the other tribes to support her. The same was true in Gaul, where various Gallic tribes were so busy fighting each other they couldn't resist the Roman legions, enabling Julius Caesar to pick them off individually with comparative ease, which of course would not have been the case had they come at him as one united force. And we see that again very clearly in North America, where had the various Indian tribes united rather than squabbling among themselves, they could well have chucked the Europeans back into the sea. Now, yes, there were alliances from time to time among the various Scandinavian kings and jarls, the enemy of my enemy being my friend sort of thing, and any threat posed to a number of the various groups at the same time, an invasion by forces from another country, for example, would have been met with a form of unified force. But for the most part, it was every man for himself, or rather, every jarl or king for himself. In Ireland, some Norse leaders actually allied themselves with native Irish chiefs, helping them fight against other Irish rivals, while the Irish then assisted the Norse to fight other Norsemen. So a Viking flag as something representative of Scandinavia as a whole, or even of any one of its component countries, did not exist. Though the raven symbolism, now the raven symbolism of it was a common feature of all Old Norse society. This misconception of the term Viking as being a description of one unified group actually comes from the very use of the word Viking, since we never say Danes landed on the east coast of England, or Norwegians raided the north of Ireland, or a shipload of Swedes burned a monastery somewhere. No, we say it was the Vikings, which implies one national group of people, like the Franks, the Anglo-Saxons, or the Normans. It implies a nationality rather than a common relationship. So no one banner could be said to be a Viking banner, though various groups of Vikings may well have used it. And of course, the term Viking did not refer to the peoples of Scandinavia as a whole, only to those men, and sometimes women, who got in a ship and went off somewhere in that ship and did something or other when they got to wherever it was they were going, be it raiding, trade, exploration, or eventual settlement. So to be strictly accurate, a Viking banner, given the true meaning of that word, would actually be a war flag, not symbolic of any national identity. And even the banners of the more powerful kings who could unite others under them would probably have been their own personal standards rather than a national flag as such, even if that standard became seen as some kind of national flag or perhaps developed into one later. However, the raven itself, now that was another matter. That was a religious symbol common to all the peoples of Scandinavia at that time. It was something that could be said to be representative of all the Norse people, something closely associated with Odin, chief of the gods of Asgard, or Asgard, as it is in English. Odin had two ravens, Hugin and Munin, and each morning he sent them out to fly across the world and return with news of everything that had transpired since their previous flight, since Odin thirsted for knowledge. So the ravens were very important to him, and as such they became important to the Old Norse as well. So while the raven banner as such was not representative of any one group, the symbol of the raven was a representative of their collective religious beliefs. It could be a very powerful symbol, often thought to possess great magic in itself, and there is evidence that others, such as the Anglo-Saxons, were well aware of the possible magic that such a symbol might possess, something that could perhaps instill fear in an enemy, given those superstitious times. Even Christian opponents, who would not, of course, believe in Odin, might still fear it, since they did believe in the evil of magic and curses and witchcraft and sorcery and demons and such like things. From that point of view, the Raven Banner could well have been carried by any number of Nordic leaders, simply for its effect on their opponents, whether they actually believed in it or not. Quite apart from any significance of Odin's ravens, all ravens were regarded by the Norse as symbols of battle itself and the blood that was shed in battle. There are frequent references to these birds in that context in the sagas and poems. Of course, there was one obvious reason for that. Ravens and crows would have arrived very quickly on the battlefield, since they were rather good at helping to tidy up the carnage, you might say, because dead warriors and the assorted bits of them scattered around were, well, they were freshly carved and tasty, if you were a raven, of course. Ravens would be picking at the bodies while they were still warm, so naturally they came to be seen as linked to battle and unpleasant death in any form, such as corpses hanging on gallows. In Old Norse and Icelandic poetry, there are frequent references to them in that light. They are referred to as bloodbirds, for example. Wars were seen as pleasing to them, something that fed them. And it's obvious where that idea came from. And feeding the ravens in battle was something that would please Odin. And they are often mentioned in the context of non-combat related bloodletting, as tearing the eyes out of executed corpses, for example. There are curses mentioned in the Poetic Edda that say, ravens shall tear out your eyes on the high gallows, or may the ravens tear your heart asunder. Not that this was seen as evil or wrong, quite on the contrary. Ravens were viewed as justified instruments of fate. They represented a harsh system of justice, which was accepted as the norm in Scandinavia. And the acceptance also that war and battles resulting from war were harsh and violent things, as were crimes for which people were executed. And again, the raven simply represented the logical outcome of that. Ravens seem to appear in pretty much every poem that was recited by the skalds that had anything to do whatsoever with warfare, either mentioned directly or alluded to, as in the case of one poem that comes to us from the Nornegesvalter, where violence is greatly appreciated by them. This poem describing the killing of the sons of Hunding by Sigurd. Now the blood eagle with a broad sword, the killer of Sigmund carved on the back. Fewer were more valiant as the troops dispersed. A chief of people who made the raven to land. I'm sure they were. After all, they got lots of assorted body parts for lunch. The Celtic Irish actually took a similar view of ravens, as it happens, seeing them as connected with warfare and battlefields. Again, probably due to the bird's hasty arrival on the scene of any bloodletting to savour the spoils. And they were very closely associated with one of Ireland's greatest goddesses, the shape-shifting goddess of war, fate, and death, patron of revenge, of victory in battle, and the foretelling of doom, the goddess Morrigan. She would tour battlefields, often taking the form of a raven or a crow herself, and crows and ravens were seen as her messengers, her eyes and ears, so that any of those birds flying around on the battlefield could simply be gathering information for the goddess, or even be Morrigan herself, come to see how things were going. Viking banners would have been primarily used to identify a particular king or jarl, a town or a region, just as later medieval knights would carry their own personal sigil on their shields or on their tabards, or as national flags developed in later centuries. The gold fleur-de-lis on a blue ground was the French, the three golden lions on a red ground was the English, and so on. So many of them, it must be assumed, would have borne symbols associated with the king or region they represented, rather than all having the same emblem, such as a raven. Something that also seems to make the idea of an overall Viking Raven Banner highly unlikely, since for one thing, it would have been rather confusing. Men, today we fight under our Raven Banner. We shall follow the Raven to victory. Oh, but the enemy also have a Raven Banner. Oh dear, that could be awkward. And that lot over there have a Raven Banner. And so do they. Oh shit! How will we know who to fight? Yes, it could have been a tad awkward in the heat of battle. But the triangular or rounded shape seems to have been a feature of these banners, and that would later continue in use by their descendants in Francia, the Normans. And the now famous raven design does seem to have been used by a number of well-known Norse leaders, there being various references to it in the historical record. The earliest reference being in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle for the year 878 AD, talking about Uber Ragnarsson, who landed with a strong force in Devonshire, or Devonshire as it is now. But there he was defeated and killed by Oda, the ealdorman of Devon, at the Battle of Sinwit. It comes down to us in a copy of that part of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle that was made circa 1120, and it isn't actually mentioned anywhere in other versions of that document. And it states, and in the winter of this same year, the brother of Ivar and Halfdan landed in Wessex with 23 ships, and there was he slain, and 800 men with him, and 40 of his army. There also was taken the war flag, which they called Raven. So here we have the Raven Banner actually referred to specifically as a war flag. It is mentioned again in the Annals of St. Neots, written in Bury St. Edmunds, circa 1120 to 1140, in which it is said that a raven banner was carried by Uber, one that had been woven by his three sisters. And the Anglo-Norman chronicler Geoffrey Geimer, writing circa 1136 to 1140, also stated that the raven was Uber's banner at the Battle of Sinwit. Here in Ireland, a raven banner seems to have been used by the Norse Gaelic kings of Dyffryn, as well as in Northumbria, where members of a clan founded by Ivar in Bainlausi, or Ivar the Boneless, supposedly the son of the great Ragnar Lothbrok and the brother of Uber, held sway. The raven banner had of course been used by Uber, so its continued usage by those who saw themselves as related to him made perfect sense. In actual fact, of course, neither Ivar nor his brothers, Uber, Halfdan, and Bjorn Ironside, were actually related to Ragnar Lothbrok, since Ragnar Lothbrok didn't exist, so being related to him, well, that would have been rather difficult. He was a saga character made up from a composite of several great Viking leaders over the years, though the four brothers are actual historical figures, and they had the name Ragnarsson, so they simply cashed in on the legend of Ragnar Lothbrok and claimed him as their father. After all, who was going to argue with the son of Ragnar Lothbrok? Oh no. One of the rulers of that clan was Olav Sigtryggsson, king of Dyffryn and Jorvik, he who destroyed the boats in Limerick, as it happens. And it is from him that we get the image now used for the Raven Banner, since on a penny coin he minted in Jorvik around 940 AD is the image of a raven with wings displayed, the same image as is now used for the Viking Raven Banner. It is an almost exact copy of what is shown on that coin. On another coin minted around the same time, a triangular banner is depicted with what seems to be a bird on it and 5 tassels hanging from the edge, mounted on the L-shaped pole. And there's a cross-like object on the top of the pole, possibly representing the beginnings of the merging of Norse and Christian traditions. The Raven Banner was also used by the Jarls of Orkney, and in the Jarl saga there is an account of how Evolva, a shamanic seer who practiced the art of sailor magic, made a banner for her son, who happened to be Jarl Sigurd the Stout, ruler of the Northern Isles, comprising both the Orkney and Shetland Islands, and he was facing an army far larger than his. He was significantly outnumbered, hence his mother's making of the banner, for she had used her magic in the making of it. It was described as being a finely made banner, cleverly embroidered with the figure of a raven, so that when it fluttered in the wind, the raven seemed to be flying ahead. But, and there was a big but, carrying it was rather a health hazard, since she told him that whoever the banner was carried on behalf of would be victorious. But the poor slob who got the job of actually holding the damn thing was going belly up. She says, "Had I thought you might live forever, I'd have reared you in my wool basket. But lifetimes are shaped by what will be, not by where you are. Now, take this banner. I've made it for you with all the skill I have, and my belief is this: it will bring victory to the man it's carried before, but death to the one who carries it." How nice. The banner seems to have done everything she expected of it. Sigurd gaining a victory. But the first man who carried the banner was killed, as also were the next 2 who took it up. Mother's prophecy seemed to be uncomfortably correct. Had there been a request for someone to grab up the banner, I personally would have taken a few steps backwards, very fast. Later, in the year 1014 AD, Jarl Sigurd sailed to Ireland, along with Jarl Broder of Man, to assist the king of Dyffryn, Sigurd Olafsson, against King Brian Boru, the self-styled Ard Ri, or High King of Ireland, who was trying to take the kingdom of Dyffryn for himself. Contrary to, of course, what generations of Irish schoolchildren were taught, Brian wasn't trying to drive the pagan Norse from the holy land of Erin. No, he was simply a land grabber. And even had he wanted to get rid of pagans, most of the population of Dyffryn were Christians by that time, King Sigurd among them. He later founded Christ Church Cathedral and went on a pilgrimage to Rome. So much for the accuracy of schoolbook history. Anyway, a great battle ensued on Good Friday at a place near Dyffryn called Clontarf. The battle so fierce that it was said the river Tolka ran red. Sigurd naturally fought beneath his raven banner, but once again those who carried it for him began to discover that standard bearer was a terminal position, something that probably hadn't been mentioned at the job interview. A number of men were killed as they carried the banner, which then fell. The saga of Burnt Njal tells it thus. Then Earl Sigurd called on Thorstein, the son of Hall of the Side, to bear the banner, and Thorstein was just about to lift the banner, but then Asmund the White said, "Don't bear the banner, for all they who bear it get that death." "Half in the red," called out Earl Sigurd. "Bear thou the banner." "Bear thine own devil thyself," answered Halfin. Then the Earl said, "'Tis fittest that the beggar should bear the bag." And with that he took the banner from the staff and put it under his cloak. Silly him. Not long thereafter, Asmund the White was killed, and Jarl Sigurd was impaled on an enemy's spear. Mother had warned him what would happen to those who carried the thing, so when he ran out of volunteer standard bearers, he might have been better off just to stick it in the ground and leave it where it was. In the saga it says, "There was no man who would bear the Raven standard, and the Earl bore it himself, and fell there." He should have listened to Mother. Mother knows best. Oh, yes. Knut Svensson, better known as King Knut the Great, was a remarkable ruler who eventually joined the thrones of 3 countries to form the so-called North Sea Empire, consisting of England, Norway, and Denmark, and a little bit of Sweden thrown in, during the early 11th century, and considered by some historians to have been the most effective ruler Anglo-Saxon England ever had, despite being a Dane, not a Saxon, forming a united 3-nation realm under a common system of law and coinage, centuries before the European Economic Union was even thought of. On the way to achieving that, he carried a raven banner made of white silk, when on October the 18th, 1016, he defeated the English king Edmund Ironside at the Battle of Assendon. There is an account of it written circa 1041 AD and presented to Canut's widow, Emma of Normandy. It states that the king had a banner which gave a wonderful omen. I am well aware that this may seem incredible to the reader, but nevertheless I shall insert it in my work because it is true. This banner was woven of the cleanest and whitest silk, and no picture of any figures was to be found on it. In case of war, however, a raven was always to be seen, as if it was woven into it. If the Danes were going to win the battle, the raven appeared, beak wide open, flapping its wings, and restless on its feet. If they were going to be defeated, the raven did not stir at all, and its limbs hung motionless. Now, there's an obvious similarity to the banner of Sigurd the Stout. As with his, Knut's was seemingly made in such a way that the raven seemed to really fly when the banner was caught by the wind, perhaps embroidered in a sort of 3D effect that made it stand out from the fabric. And one wonders if perhaps there were actually 2 banners, one with and one without a raven, and they just did a sort of magician's sleight of hand trick prior to battle, substituting the raven one for the plain one to boost morale. "Oh, the banner has no raven! All is lost! Look, men, look! Are those reinforcements over there? Oh, behold, behold! The gods smile on us this day. The raven is upon the banner. Charge! The raven leads us!" Yep, that does seem rather likely. I've mentioned already the connection between ravens and battles seen by the Norse and the Celtic Irish, and that is also shown by a mention of the raven in its battle-related context, though not on the banner, in a skaldic poem about the Battle of Assendon, written by one of Knut's own skalds, a man named Ottar. He writes, "At Assendon you worked well in the shield war, warrior king. Brown was the flesh of bodies served to the bloodbird. In the slaughter you won, sire, with your sword, enough of a name there, north of the Danes' woods." Once again, we have happy bloodbirds enjoying dice warriors al fresco. Yummy. Jarl Sigurd of Northumbria had a raven banner named Landwaster, circa 1050 AD, given to him, it was said, by a mysterious man. And a very famous Viking leader who also used a raven banner was the great king of Norway, Harald Sigurdsson, better known as Harald Hardrada, or Harold the Hard Ruler, who carried a banner known by the same name as Jarl Sigurd's, the Landwaster, which was described by Snorri Sturluson in the Heimskringla saga in his prose Edda. It was Harald's most prized possession, as it happens, and he is recorded as telling King Svein II of Denmark that he valued it above all else that he possessed, since it was prophesied that the banner would bring victory to whoever bore it, and that it had always done so in his case, since he had obtained it, which also shows a considerable likeness to the Volva-made magic banner of Sigurd the Stout, though rather more user-friendly to those who carried it. Harald fought under the land waster at the Battle of Fulford, the banner once again bringing him victory, when he defeated the English earls Edwin and Morka, and shortly after that, during the famous Battle of Stamford Bridge on September the 25th, 1066, the banner being carried, we are told, by a warrior named Friarek. When the king attempted to gain the throne of England, unsuccessfully as it turned out, the banner failing to bring the desired victory on this occasion, and an arrow stuck in his neck permanently removed any thoughts Harold might have had about ruling England, or indeed anywhere else for that matter. There was a considerable fight apparently for possession of the banner after King Harold was killed, and his army was overpowered and decimated, with only 20 ships required to bring the survivors back to Norway, who had arrived in 300 ships. That tells you something about the battle, but I'm sure the Bloodbirds were quite happy about that. Dinner was served. It's rather interesting, I think, that King Harald, though supposedly a Christian, would carry a banner with an obviously pagan emblem, since his banner was clearly one in the old manner, rather than the raven simply being a heraldic emblem, as was the case later in the Middle Ages. And that is reinforced by his belief in the prophecy of the banner's power to bring victory. This is totally pagan. That is exactly the same as the idea of the one made with cedar magic by a Volvo for Jarl Sigurd, and decidedly unchristian. Now, yes, Christians also believe in symbols to bring victory, but not ravens. And a Christian banner might be expected to have had a cross on it, or even the figure of Christ himself. But for King Harold to use something so closely associated with Old Norse religious belief and subscribe to its magical properties, despite its not having any Christian emblem on it, does make one wonder if perhaps his Christianity was not as deeply felt as it might have been, or he was more open to other ideas than many people of his time, which seems a bit unlikely. His morality certainly seemed to lean towards the pagan past. The raven was, of course, also found not just on banners, but on other military-related things, such as a Vendelier shield decorated with ravens, and a nasal-type helmet from the same era, the era that preceded the so-called Viking Age. A helmet very similar to this one, though perhaps a little fancier. And on it, the nose guard is shaped rather like an elongated pear, and it is actually made as an upside-down raven. Its head down here and the wings folding back. And those items are now in the National Museum of Sweden. There has been a challenge to the triangular tassel image of these banners. Some scholars saying they weren't banners at all. They were actually the thin metal triangular weather vanes that were mounted on ships, and the tassels were simply to either move in the wind with perhaps bells on them, or to help the vane to turn, showing the direction of the wind. And that it was those that were represented by the images on the Jorvik coins. I've already mentioned the similarity. But given the number of images of tasseled banners of all kinds, such as those shown in the Bayeux tapestry, which I'll come to in a moment, I don't think there's any concrete evidence for that. Possible, though it might be. Though the only images we have that show banners being banners without a doubt on the Bayeux tapestry don't show the L-shaped pole, which the weather vane proponents, of course, point to as evidence for their theory. The tapestry, however, isn't Viking. It's Norman, and from a later period, so that could simply be a change of usage. We do have absolute proof, however, of the raven image being used on Viking banners, since that is explicitly mentioned so many times, as we've seen. So there were raven banners without a shadow of doubt, regardless of what shape they actually were, and triangular and other styles of tassel banners are an established fact, whether or not the Vikings actually used them. It might come down to, well, which you think they were more likely to put on a coin, a weather vane from a ship or a battle standard they fought under. Take your pick, but whichever version you want to believe, the raven itself, it keeps its place on the Norse banners. To that there is no contradiction. Several banners that show a considerable likeness to the Viking ones can be found on the famous Bayeux tapestry, commissioned by Bishop Odo, half-brother of Duke William of Normandy, to commemorate the Duke's victory at the Battle of Hastings in 1066, resulting in his becoming King William I of England, having killed the English King Harold Godwinson After that gentleman rather foolishly rushed south to meet William after narrowly defeating Harald Hardrada at Stamford Bridge, instead of taking his time, resting and gathering more men. And King Harald went out of history in much the same way as Harald Hardrada, only in his case the arrow got stuck in his eye. Not a coincidence. The end result was the same, of course. Now, Odo had been in the Battle of Hastings, so he would be very well aware of any standards that would have been carried. There is one panel showing the Norman cavalry charging at the Anglo-Saxon forces, and one of them carries a lance with a semicircular, almost triangular banner, with 9 tassels hanging from it and emblazoned with a standing black bird, which seems most likely, given its colour and its shape, to represent a raven. In another panel, a fully triangular banner with 4 tassels is shown lying broken on the ground, having a thick edge to it like it was trimmed or something, but no emblem of any kind. There is also a rectangular banner with 5 tassels, very heavily trimmed edge, and an obvious bird on it, shown with outstretched wings, again presumably a raven. Though not exactly the same as the Viking ones, there is a striking similarity. The Normans were, of course, descendants of Vikings who had settled in Francia over 150 years previously, so such a similarity would seem hardly surprising. And from them comes that one very detailed image of a tasseled raven banner sort of between semicircular and triangular in shape, as well as the fully triangular tasseled one. So, that is the story of the Viking Raven Banner, as far as we know it. I hope you found it interesting. If you did, perhaps you'd care to like and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, and all that remains now is to say farewell. Bye till next time.